Whether you have a podcast that you want to grow or you're launching one for the first time, there are 3 secret ingredients that you're going to need if you want to get that podcast in the top 100. Nobody is talking about this. So pay close attention to my voice right now, because in this episode, we are going to dive into what these ingredients are, how they function together, and most importantly, what's going to happen if you're missing any one of them. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Now, the first key ingredient to a top 100 podcast, and the invisible backbone or cornerstone, if you will, that makes all of this work, is binge-worthy content and a formula for creating it. Nobody is talking about this. Nobody. Most podcast mentors or coaches will show you how to produce a podcast logistically. But I've yet to meet a single one who is teaching you how to command attention in the podcasting space psychologically. Because here's what I want you to understand. It's one thing to have a podcast, but it is another thing entirely to know how to create subconsciously hyper-effective content that keeps people's attention, that can attract new listeners to your show on repeat, and convert those listeners into leads for your offers. And this is a missing link for 99% of podcast hosts. So to be clear, when I say binge-worthy content, I am not just referring to the content inside your episodes. Because despite what you might have heard, highly valuable episode content will not help you attract new listeners. There are actually 5 other content gatekeepers that your listeners encounter before they reach your episodes. And these gatekeepers will determine whether or not they hit play. But here's what I want you to understand right now, is that every top 100 host out there knows that a binge-worthy content system is the invisible mechanism that's responsible not just for getting your show in front of potential new listeners, but communicating to those listeners why they should listen, why they should choose your show over other shows, keeping them listening till the end of your episode, not just clicking play for 2 minutes and never coming back, and ultimately converting those listeners to leads for your business. It's going to be virtually impossible to have a top 100 podcast without it, because you're going to blend right in with everyone else who's teaching exactly what you teach. So a strategically built binge-worthy content system gives you differentiation so that you can get more eyes on your podcast. Now, the second piece to making all of this work is what we call a launch and relaunch system. And this piece is one that often gets overlooked. I've never seen anyone else teaching this in the podcasting space. And it boggles my mind because this piece is critical to your podcast's ability to get discovered by new potential listeners. We are approaching an all-time high of over 500 million listeners globally. But if you don't know how to get them listening to your podcast, well, it's going to be really difficult to grow your show, and it's going to take you 5 times as long. So if you want your show and your name to appear in those Apple charts, you got to launch your podcast. And if you have an existing podcast that either you never properly launched or maybe you've reached a plateau, the good news is that you can relaunch it. And the beautiful thing about having this system is that not only will it serve you in the beginning stages of your podcast, but at any point in the future, when you reach a plateau in your growth, you can implement this system, and it's like a vitamin B shot for your listener growth. Now, I will say this. When I say the word launch, sometimes I get weird looks from people because they're like, oh, launching. I hate launching. I hate launching my programs. Launching so stressful, right? All of this stuff that comes up for so many of us online business owners when we launch something. But the good news is that a podcast launch, it's so much fun. It's so much easier than a traditional course or program launch. So we'll dive deeper into what this looks like in an upcoming episode as well. But before we get to that, we got to talk about the third ingredient that you're going to need if you want a top 100 podcast. And this is a long-term audience building strategy, or long-term growth strategy for short. And this is where you're going to begin to create leverage with your podcast so that you can get the maximum result for the minimum amount of time and effort on your part. Because look, it's one thing to have a podcast that ranks in the charts when you launch it, but it's an entirely different thing to have a show that ranks week over week over week over the long term. You'll be uncompete-withable. I know that's not a word. I think it should be, because no one will be able to compete with you. And right now, you're probably listening to my voice and you're like, okay, Courtney, sounds good. I'm with you. Okay, I know that we got to have content that attracts and keeps and converts people. I hear what you're saying about launching and relaunching it. Curious to learn more about that. Obviously, I'm going to need some kind of strategy to grow this thing long term, so I get that. But what I really want to show you next is the magic of these ingredients working together and what can happen for you when we combine them. Because just like a batch of chocolate chip cookies, the ingredients on their own don't really amount to much. It's the synergy between them that gives you the result that you're looking for. So let's look at what happens when you combine these ingredients. So when you combine a binge-worthy content formula with a launch and relaunch system, this is the secret sauce to a top 100 podcast. This is the thing that will get you in the charts initially and get people choosing your show. It's how you get potential listeners' eyeballs on you. Kind of like flipping a light switch on in a dark room, where previously you were the industry's best kept secret. Now people know who you are. They know what you stand for. And they know why they should care about what you do. And with this, these two elements combined, you're going to be able to create insane subconscious demand for your unique expertise. And this will give you the competitive edge because you're going to know how to communicate why your show is worth listening to, unlike other podcasters who don't have these elements in place. So if you're like, okay, great, sounds good, then just wait, because it gets better. Let's look at what happens when you combine that long-term growth strategy into the mix. Because what this does is it gives you consistent audience growth by instantly elevating your authority so that now people see you as the in-demand thought leader in your niche. And you're going to see consistent audience growth because of it as more and more people discover you and want to learn from you. Think of it like a renowned doctor, someone who is known for helping people solve a specific problem. And now he is the go-to person for that because as he's getting discovered by more and more people are talking about him and they're talking about how amazing he is at what he does, his practice grows. It can't not grow. And the same thing happens here. So with this, you're going to be able to turn cold traffic into warm traffic fast and drive that traffic from your podcast to your offers without expensive ad funnels or big retargeting budgets or wanting to poke your eyes out creating more short form organic content for social media. And here's the best part about it, because when you have this long-term growth strategy in place, not only do the rest of your platforms start to grow too, like your social media channels and your email list, but people pay you. And you'll be able to create sustainable income as you convert traffic from your podcast to your offers, which for us as business owners is by far the most profitable way that we can monetize a podcast. So hopefully you can see by now how each pillar helps you differentiate yourself, stand out from the competition, get discovered by more potential listeners, and create demand for the work that you do. But the only way that this works is if you have all three ingredients. Because if you're making chocolate chip cookies, but you leave out the chocolate chips, well, you're not going to get the end result you're hoping for. So before we dive deeper into each of these pillars, I'm going to show you what happens if you're missing any one of these three ingredients. If you're missing a binge-worthy content formula or a launch or relaunch system right out the gate, your podcast is going to get overlooked. Even if you have superior content, you're going to remain the unheard expert because you'll have no way of communicating to your listener why your show is worth listening to. And if you're listening right now because you have a podcast that isn't growing, this might be happening to you right now. And because of it, people will choose other podcasts to listen to over yours. And you're going to be right back where you started, struggling to get people's attention and competing in a sea of billions of people out there who are vying for the eyeballs of your ideal clients. But it gets worse because if people don't know how much you know and how much you can help them, how are you ever going to be able to create the impact that you want? You won't. You'll remain the unheard expert and continue experiencing sluggish, stagnant audience growth. And as much as we all want to be seen as authorities in our space, your authority means nothing if there's no demand for it. And the problem is, if there's no demand and people don't see you as an authority, then guess what? It'll be impossible to make the kind of income you want to make in your business too. Because authority is no good without demand. And no demand for the work that you do is going to negatively impact your income. So if you want a top 100 podcast, you're going to need these three things. You're going to need a binge-worthy content system so that you can create an addictive podcast experience that continually attracts new listeners to your show and converts them to your offers. You're going to need a launch and relaunch system so you can rank and get discovered by a global audience of your ideal clients. And you're going to need a long-term growth strategy for a sustainable, scalable marketing system that allows you to leverage your time and increase enrollments and create a raving community of loyal fans who see you as the go-to expert. So if all of this is making sense, then come with me to the next episode because we're going to dive deeper into ingredient number 1, which is all about creating binge-worthy content. But I'm not just talking about the content inside your episodes. I'm talking about the steps along the way of the listener journey before they decide whether or not they're going to hit play. Now, this is going to be essential for you to get as a podcaster because without it, it's going to be difficult to attract, keep, and convert new listeners.